Hey guys, how are all of you doing? Hope fine, and yes, this is the next part of Game of Shadow in Naruto world. Where I am in the Naruto world. I have a name that isn't mine and I have a really nerfed version of the gamer. Is that all? Am I forgetting something? Right, inventory. At that I received yet another disappointment. Let's start without any delay. Come on, I thought to myself, impatiently tapping my foot against the ground. Come on. After my talk with Sasuke, I went out and chatted with Naruto and Sakura. I was very relieved that, at least, Orochimaru hadn't gotten to mess with my brother's seal. Small mercies and all that. That meant that they were mostly fine, even if, after the attack, the two of them had to carry Sasuke almost the whole way through the forest and fight for their scroll. The two had decided to follow the Uchiha's example and just rest for the rest of the day, since the second test would be done the next day. Anko herself had to go to appease foreign ninja that could suspect foul play. There were probably ways for us to get away with it, but it wasn't worth the political trouble that could follow. Where the hell are you guys? I called out in my mind as I grew nervous. Team 10 was still nowhere in sight and it was starting to get to me. Every time I closed my eyes I would remember that Gaara had killed people inside the forest. How many others had done so too? After all, they could do so without consequences, with the waivers and all. Granted, there probably weren't many people around like the Suna Jinchuriki who would risk killing clan heirs and bringing the anger of Konoha on them and their countries. But, evidently, there were exceptions to every rule. And that meant that they could be. They are fine, I told myself, screwing my eyes shut for a moment. Been waiting for a while, huh? My eyes snapped open to see a smirking Shikamaru come out of the forest, closely followed by Ino and Chaoji. The three of them looked terrible, I wasn't even gonna sugarcoat that. But they were standing, there were no visible wounds and... What happened? I asked, my eyes locked onto Chaoji's form. The boy looked fine, at first sight, and if you didn't know him though. He was standing straight, making his big body look pretty imposing, and his eyes looked straight ahead, unflinching. But that wasn't Chaoji. Chaoji never stood so stiffly. He was always relaxed, like he was a breath away from taking a snack from somewhere and starting eating, which was often the case. His eyes were never so cold either, they were always warm and inviting. The guy hadn't even said anything to me. He looked like a soldier. Yeah. Shika sighed as he continued walking. Let us finish this, we have to talk. I nodded as I walked next to them, keeping my worries in as I waited for them to be done so they could tell me what the hell happened in the woods. A part of my mind scolded me, telling me that I was being overprotective again. That I should calm down. But this was serious. Maybe once things calmed down, once there wasn't any more danger on the horizon. Like during the 3 years time skip, if it even happened to begin with. Very little happened during that, which meant that I could relax. But now, in the middle of the forest of death, with one of the most dangerous missing nin roaming around and messing with everything, with all 5 of the big elemental nations having teams in the village and who knew what else that I probably wasn't aware of. I could do nothing but worry. Especially when my friends looked like they had been put through the ringer and one of them looked nothing like he normally would. Their sensei appeared in a cloud of smoke and, after giving the speech about them passing with a bored tone, took one look at his team and said, "You look like shit." Both Shika and I rolled our eyes at Asuma's very subtle wording. Right, the 3 of you, straight to the infirmary. I nodded appreciatively. At least he clearly cared. His eyes found mine and I stared right back at him, raising an eyebrow. I was sure he wouldn't, but I still dared him to tell me to go away or something. So, you are the one these three won't shut up about. Asuma-sensei. Ino all but screeched indignantly. Shikamaru just sighed tiredly, head and shoulders slumping down. Chaoji's reaction though, a twitch of his lips that almost became a smile, relieved me a little. My friend was in there somewhere. Now I just needed to pull him out. Ig Sato I nodded at the Jounin. Asuma Sarutabi he introduced himself. Their minder, you could say. So, we have the same job, huh? I shot back with a half smile that he returned. You too, I heard Asuma gulp at the same time I did when we turned to the blonde in Team 10. No teasing, got it, I thought to myself. Can I? Everyone went silent as the Akimichi opened his mouth for the first time. Can I speak with Ig? The boy finished his question. His voice didn't betray any emotion, which was more telling than anything else could have, to me at least. Sure thing, big guy, I reassured, putting a hand on his shoulder and bringing him into a one-armed hug. Like that, I steered him towards the infirmary. We'll have you checked just in case and then we'll talk as much as you want. Thanks, he whispered, low enough that I wasn't sure he had wanted me to hear him. Think nothing of it, brother. I gave his shoulder a squeeze. My eyes moved to the rest of the team. Ino gave me 2 thumbs up with an encouraging smile, even if her eyes looked worriedly at Chaoji. Shikamaru's expression didn't change much, but his eyes were begging me. As if you needed to ask such a thing. Asuma. I wasn't sure what I had expected from him, to be honest. But what I received was a pair of narrowed eyes as he looked between us. A moment later, he gave me a grateful nod before he started pushing the rest of his team towards the infirmary too. Oh. I thought it would be easier, was the first thing Chaoji said after he was done telling me what happened in the forest. His wounds had been treated already and we were both sitting at the top of the tower, looking off at the forest and the horizon. Ninja talk about it all the time. I should have been ready for it. Chaoji, I started, before he could spiral out of control with his words. I got the gist of it with those 2 sentences anyway. Have you ever seen such a thing? No, but... Then you couldn't have been ready, I told him, giving him a sad smile. I had much time to ponder on the subject after the sword's mission. I didn't consider myself an expert, but I thought I had a much better idea at that moment than when it first happened. Knowing that something will happen and actually seeing it happen are different things. I knew I would have to kill someday too, but you saw how I was after actually doing it. Him, and all of our friends for that matter, had grown up inside the village. And Konoha was many things, but, for the most part, it could almost pass as a normal city. Children grew up knowing that the world was a lot darker than what they saw, yes. However, that didn't make them immune to that darkness. It just prepared them for it, so that they wouldn't crumble as someone from my world might have. But you were a civilian before. You didn't have a Shinobi family too. He stopped there, a grimace taking over his face. Sorry, I didn't mean to. Don't worry, I kept my smile in place. It wasn't difficult. I hadn't had much of a problem with being an orphan to begin with. I hadn't actually lived through that childhood, after all. We are the only 2 that have actually killed someone. Chaoji, I saw his hands twitch at my words, but I continued. And I can promise you, that everyone else will be affected too when it's their turn. Sajuk. Witnessed things that no one should. I nodded, expecting that point from the beginning. But the point stands. He hasn't killed anyone yet. And that means he will react in some way. I don't think anyone can just shrug it off, you know. Everyone feels something when they take a life. Or, that's what I want to believe. It's something that shouldn't leave anyone indifferent. He sat next to me in silence for a moment after that, taking those words in. Does how I took it make me a bad ninja? I don't believe so, I denied, trying not to sound too reassuring. I wanted him to believe what I was saying, not to think I was just comforting him. I would be more worried if you had been happy or something of the sort. He shuddered at the idea. You did what you did, Chaoji, and then you squared your shoulders and kept going. You did well. I did. He asked, his voice shaking. That's when I knew that I had said something right. Chaoji, I will ask you something and I want you to think about it, okay? I told him, and he turned his eyes to me before giving me a nervous nod. If you were there again, what would you do? Would you fight again and risk the same happening, or would you run away? He didn't answer right away, but I didn't expect him to. Instead, I sat there looking as the sun continued his way down the sky. Chaoji, next to me, would occasionally mutter something unintelligible or sigh, his hands gripping his shorts tightly. And then, he broke the silence. I would fight was his answer, grim but resolute. Why? I asked this time, my voice not betraying anything. Because they were attacking us, it's what I had to do. For Shikamaru and Ino, running wouldn't have stopped then, or maybe it wouldn't have even worked. You are a great brother, Chaoji. I turned to him then, smiling widely. And I'm very proud of you. But you are willing to fight, to kill for those you care about. And I know you, Chaoji. I know you are a kind person. You didn't even want to fight when we first met, remember? And here you are, putting that aside for your friends. But, there are missions, they would ask me to. He struggled before giving up and looking down, frustrated. You can choose your missions, I replied to that, blatantly ignoring how I had been forced on a mission. I wanted to believe, maybe willfully, that the sword's mission had been an exception. You can choose to never take a mission that could involve killing. I wouldn't think any less of you for that. I had seen those missions too. Danza had given me a folder or two on such things. It had made me understand them a little better. Some of them were jobs issued by third parties, jobs that were only for money. Those were only accepted if they wouldn't negatively affect Konoha though. And there were some others that were issued by Konoha itself. Assassination of people that either worked against the village, or the nation, or were otherwise having a similar effect on them. There were even some that were done solely because they would benefit Konoha. I was sure I would never take one of the first ones. And as for the third, I doubted it. The seconds though, I could see myself taking those. Which? I wasn't sure how to take that, at the moment. Thank you. Thank you for listening and everything else, Chaoji said, still looking down, but his voice alone sounded much calmer at that moment. I hope I helped. You did, he nodded, and he was almost smiling. He wasn't quite there yet, but I would take what I could. With that said, the boy started standing up. You should talk with your sensei, he'll have better advice than me, I told him as I joined him walking back inside the tower. And your parents, once we are done here. I will, he nodded. I was pleased to see that his shoulders weren't as tense anymore. I wanted to talk with you first. It's less weird, I guess, he explained hesitantly as he scratched his cheek with his finger. Well, if you ever need to talk, you know I'll listen. I don't promise the advice will be good though. He chuckled lightly and I let out a soft breath. Chaoji would be all right. Oh. I couldn't help but smirk a bit once the second test was officially over. The very next morning everyone was taken to where the preliminaries would be held and of course, Raider did Anko's part and gave a little speech, followed by the Hokage. The reason for my grin was simple enough. He had just got done telling us that the exams were a war in miniature between the nations. Couldn't have said it better myself, Hiruzen, I thought to myself as my eyes looked over the remaining teams. There was at least one from each major village, with 4 teams from Konoha. That was bound to annoy the others, that's for sure. I could see the representatives from Kumo and Iwa looking around with frowns, as if searching for more of their people. I took a specially good look at the Iwa team though. Not because of anything related to my little encounter with the princess and her team though. I was concerned they would have learned about Team 10's clash with one of their teams and the result of it. The last thing I needed was one of my friends getting killed during one of the duels because of an unfortunate mistake. As Hayate Gecko made his appearance and explained to us the preliminary part of the third test, I prepared myself mentally for what was to follow, if it happened. I had no guarantees, of course. Cannon had flown out the window a long time ago, I knew that much. But, there was a distinct possibility that certain parts would remain. And sure enough. Sorry, Ig, Yoroi, Kabuto said, raising his hand when Gecko asked if anyone wanted to quit. I idly noticed that one of the Kumonin was leaving too. That encounter with the giant snake hit me pretty hard. I thought I had recovered enough, but the rest of the exam took a lot of chakra out of me. My reserves were never great to begin with, he explained bitterly. Meanwhile, I was fighting a battle with myself in order not to grin from ear to ear and laugh out loud. I got you, son of a bitch, I thought to myself. Why? Very simple. I could now make a few very understandable comments here and there about how it was suspicious that my teammate quit the exam, having days to recover his chakra and not really having faced that much of a problem in the forest. To anyone else, those excuses would have been enough. Small chakra reserves were a thing, yeah, but I had observed the guy pretty closely after we were introduced. And I knew medical jutsu too. So I knew that there was no way he had used that much in the forest. The only unknown to me was what happened after we got separated due to the snake summons, but Anko and Raider had talked to my team, which meant that they had gotten a look at them. And thus, they had most probably seen that Kabuto wasn't that affected by the whole event. Man, it's like I want to mess up Cannon, at this point I thought to myself. It didn't matter anyway. The plot was never going to be the same regardless of what I did at that point. So, if I could help avoid the crush altogether, then why wouldn't I? Hiruzen Sarutabi, 3rd Hokage of Konohagakure, died during the invasion. I would do my best to avoid that. First of all, because the death of our leader in front of people from all nations could be a disaster for the entire village. Second, because he was Naruto's grandfather in all but name and also, probably, the first person to look out for the blonde. I needed to repay that. And third, because I had grown fond of the old man, slowly, during rare visits and long talks, we had gotten close. So, thank you, Kabuto, I thought to myself, my eyes following my teammate as he left the room. I very much appreciate you giving me a hand here. You are a true teammate, indeed. Ig. Yoroi asked and I turned to him, noticing that a smirk had appeared on my face without me even noticing. I'm just excited, I lied through my teeth, making a show of signaling the other teams. Have you seen these people? This is going to be fun. I hadn't even finished the statement, when we were hit with a wave of killing intent. Bloodlust, I called in my mind, and my eyes moved to lock with Gaara's. Next to me, I saw Yoroi tense up, although I wasn't even sure what he would have done if something happened. Yeah, Anko said as one of her hands grabbed my shoulder and guided me towards the balcony where we would expectate. You can have your fun in a bit, IG. Sakura vs. Tomrai, Gecko announced, and I grimaced. Welp, everyone knows how this is gonna go, I commented somewhat dejectedly. Wow, such a show of support to the village, ha, IG. Ino asked sarcastically, her team on one side of mine. I raised an eyebrow at her, asking if she seriously expected something else from the fight. Lazily, I leaned on the railing. I mean, not to bash on Sakura or anything, but she is the weakest of all of us, I pointed out neutrally. I really didn't have anything against Sakura, but she wasn't very serious about her training, and it showed. Not only did she start training with us very late, but she took to it, rather lazily, and that's saying something when I have Shikamaru as a friend. I mean, she does work a lot, Ino tried to defend. She studies a lot, Shikamaru joined, leaning forward just like me on the blonde's other side. But she didn't train much for fights. Unless she did better in team training? He asked, voicing the only hole in our logic. She didn't. Naruto forced out, clearly not waiting to speak badly of his teammate but also trying to avoid lying. Did she ever decide between Genjutsu and Irreal Jutsu? I asked out loud as both fighters looked at each other. Poor Sakura looked very nervous, while Tomrai looked like a predator would a particularly easy prey. Not really, Kakashi answered from behind us, leaning against the wall. She leaned more towards Irreal Jutsu with time though. So, not enough to make any of the two count much for a fight. I reasoned with a grimace. Yeah, this'll be a quick one. Hey, that chick could be weak too, Naruto tried, but I gave a half smile with no mirth in it as a response. If she is anything like her teammate, this will be over really fast, I replied. Teammate? Sasuke asked, suddenly much more invested in the conversation. The redhead, I said, my eyes focusing on Gaara, who was still looking straight at me. I crossed paths with the guy in the forest, he is. I wouldn't want to face him here, or ever. The message had the desired effect. All my friends reacted to that. Some faces paled, some shoulders tensed, some eyes widened. Even the teachers snapped their eyes to me. I would be lying if I said I wasn't a bit proud of them making such a big deal of my words. I wasn't afraid of Gaara though, not really. I had been thinking over strategies for everyone that passed the second test, in case I had to go against them, when I wasn't worrying. And I could at the very least survive the guy. Winning a fight was still to be determined, but I was probably around Lee's speed without my weights, and if I used the lightning flicker I was even faster. There was no way the Jinchuriki could get me with his sand. The problem was getting past his defenses. I had new Iberi, yes. I was almost positive the needle could pierce through his sand. The problem was that revealing the legendary sword was a problem in itself. Nobody had told me that I couldn't use the sword, that much was true, but I was still reluctant to do so. I had been keeping it a secret for a reason, after all. Regardless of that though, I needed everyone else to be wary of that guy. With any luck, he would face one of the other village's ninja. Maybe it was wrong for me to think like that, mostly because whoever faced him had a very good chance of dying. But I would take that option over one of my friends any day. Begin. Gecko called out, and Sakura was sent right to a wall. The wind created by Tamrai's fan was so strong that there was even a breeze hitting us, and we weren't even that close. I wanted to feel bad for the Pinkette, I really did. But it was better this way, for her at least. This would be a very much needed wake-up call for her. With her feet back on the ground, Sakura went through a series of hand seals. I noticed a few things though. First, Tamrai wasn't throwing a follow-up attack after the first, even when she had more than enough time. Second, the Konoha nin seals were really slow. Or, at least, slow for a ninja. Yeah, she is out, I declared mercilessly. Nobody tried to defend her this time. And I continued, my eyes turning to the other Kunoichi. Is toying with her. Might work to Sakura's advantage, Kakashi commented with what I assumed was his usual uninterested tone. Naruto had many things to say about that. Yeah, no, I shook my head. If Sakura had an ace up her sleeve, maybe. Does she have that? The other two parts of Team 7 shook their heads, still looking at the fight. Tamrai dispelled whatever genjutsu Sakura had used on her, and by her expression she barely suppressed a roll of her eyes. Then no, she is done, I decided. Again, I'm not trying to insult her. She just has other strengths, and that much was true. If I needed a brain to pick, Sakura or Shikamaru were the pair that came to mind. Granted, I was closer to the second, so he would be the one I would actually ask, but the fact that she was on the same level spoke volumes. These exams don't focus on those points though. These are more about shows of strength and such. That's true, Kakashi accepted easily. The guy most probably already knew all these. But then, why would you? Naruto sputtered at his sensei. Because if she didn't come, then you two wouldn't have either, I explained, feeling a bit bitter as I saw Sakura be sent flying again. It was sad, really, that she had been made a participant of these when she was clearly not ready. But it was what it was. If Konoha wanted to make a show of these exams, they needed the last Uchiha in them. Naruto too, although. My eyes moved towards Kurotsuchi. His presence will most likely open a can of worms, I realized. Another thing to worry about with these exams, I guess. Winner, Tamrai of the Sand Gecko announced, to the surprise of nobody. Poor Sakura had been knocked unconscious after one of her opponent's half-assed wind bursts hit her a bit too hard against a wall. Now, who's next? Tenten vs. Sasuke. She is a weapons specialist, as far as I know. Must have pretty good taijutsu too, I told Sasuke as he passed beside me on his way down the balcony. And don't forget what I told you. He nodded without replying, but his expression remained serious. I took solace on the fact that he didn't seem to have grown annoyed at my advice and reminder. I knew that Mark had to be eating at his patience, but there was no way for me to help him. I hope he wins though, I thought to myself, feeling worry building inside me. After all, if he lost, he may blame me for telling him not to use jutsu. Or he might feel like he wasn't progressing fast enough and that he needed more power, which would drive him right into Orochimaru's clutches. And I couldn't let that happen. Thoughts? Shikamaru asked beside me. Could go either way, I replied, eyeing both fighters. Sasuke can't use jutsu and Tenten, as I said, specializes in weapons. Also, her sensei is a taijutsu master, so doesn't look too good, huh? The Nara finished, a small, concerned frown on his face. It still surprised me that I had managed to change his lazy attitude so much. Maybe, before the changes, he would have cared too, but I was sure he wouldn't have shown it as much. It's still Sasuke. He might surprise us, Naruto noted with a big grin, and the both of us gave him a half smile. He's not wrong, I guess, I thought, turning back to the current participants. Begin. 8 shuriken appeared the second the word was finished, 4 from each side. Both of them caught the projectiles before they could hit. I let out a soft whistle at that. It was nice to watch, at least. Like a fast, difficult and very dangerous game of catch. You are decent, at least Tenten praised with a smirk as she sent the metal stars back to Sasuke, immediately pulling out more and following up the attack. The Uchiha, for his part, decided that catching or blocking was overrated, it seemed. Instead, he dashed to the side, the little weapons hitting the walls that would have been behind him as he ran. I was a bit surprised by that, actually. With Rock Lee as a teammate, I expected her to. A Q9 nicked Sasuke's arm then, and I realized she had to get used to his speed. Makes sense, I guessed. It wasn't like throwing things at Lee was the same as throwing things at someone else. Even if you could hit something that went super fast, you still needed to at least get a hang when it came to a different target speed. Unfortunately for Sasuke, he hadn't managed to close the gap between the both of them. I was, however, unsure if that would even help. She had 2 Taijutsu specialists in her team and a Taijutsu master as a sensei. Even if it wasn't her focus, her hand-to-hand combat should still be very advanced. From there, the Uchiha seemed to switch strategies. Instead of just running, he added dodging to the mix. Or, at least, that's what it looked like. It's more like he's zigzagging towards her, but he's using different speeds to mess with her aim, I realized with a small smile. At least he isn't dumb, that's good, Shika voiced, and I hummed. Eventually, Tenten grew tired of the little game that was going on. As Sasuke grew closer, she pulled out a scroll. My eyes narrowed and Naruto let out an interested sound as he noticed what was going on. As little clouds of smoke started appearing from the now open roll of paper, I clicked my tongue. Sasuke had to pull back just to avoid the veritable barrage of projectiles that came his way, but not without at least throwing some of his own back. That was good. If he let her do as she pleased, she could keep that up for a while. This way, at least she had to stop to deflect his attack. Problem was, almost all his progress was lost, and it showed. His brows were now furrowed into a scowl and he was almost snarling. Come on, think of something, I thought to myself, but kept silent. Actually, I blinked as I turned my eyes towards Naruto for a second. The blonde was just standing there, leaning over the railing just like Shika and me, looking at the fight interestedly. Weird, I had half expected him to shout encouragement. I turned back just in time to see Sasuke pull a handful of shuriken in each hand. If I had to guess, those were all that he still had on his arms. Snapped forward for the throw, though he only threw a couple and they were way off. I frowned before a smile appeared on my face. A second later, my guess proved right when he threw the rest of his shuriken. They, like the previous bunch, went wide. But that was on purpose. The first ones had gone without much speed after all. And thus, he changed the trajectory mid-flight. It was a trick that I had never tried myself, but seeing it, I might try it, if only for the coolness factor, I thought as Naruto let out a low woe from beside me. Show off, Shikamaru scoffed, but I could hear the grin on his face. Impressive as that was, it didn't end the match or anything of the sort. What it did do, though, was get Tenten's arms with the shuriken. Solid hits at that. The wounds weren't all that, since the stars hadn't had that much strength behind them due to the trick, but it was enough to stop her barrage. The girl herself let out a slight groan and a mutter under her breath. No doubt cursing Sasuke and berating herself. She would be very attentive of that particular attack from now on, that was for sure. She was probably also going to try to copy it too, if I had to bet. Charging once again, the Uchiha leaned down as he zigzagged towards his opponent. The reason was obvious to everyone as he started picking up weapons from the floor close to him and throwing them back at their owner. From time to time, he would throw the same trick again with only one kunai or shuriken, probably to keep the girl on her toes. Once he drew close enough though, Tenten gave up on the projectiles, pulling out 2 tantos from another seal. With one on each hand, she ran towards Sasuke, who instantly pulled 2 kunai to parry her strikes. I didn't know how smart it was to face her, of all people, like that. She was a weapons specialist after all, but I didn't know if that extended towards kenjutsu or if it was just projectiles for now. She looked to be pretty good to my eyes, which made it surprising that Sasuke was able to keep up. Not without effort, but, since he didn't practice kenjutsu himself, it was still impressive. What followed was a very familiar dance for my eyes, although I was more used to being a participant than a spectator by then. With blades slashing and parrying, feints and dodges, attack and defense. However, at this rate I noticed with a grimace, Sasuke will lose. Sasuke had only had one night in the tower, besides the mark messing with him both physically and mentally, and it showed. He was nowhere near as recovered as Tenten obviously was. I would have been hard-pressed to say who had the advantage if they were both in top condition, but right then and there was no doubt in my mind about what would happen if this kept on. After one last attempt, Sasuke jumped back, wasting all his efforts to draw closer to Tenten. It was the best choice for him though. Going to give up? Tenten asked, one of her hands already holding a scroll that was probably filled with projectiles that would rain on Sasuke. The Uchiha himself took a deep breath in. Yeah, no, the boy gave a shake of his head and smirked. The sound of smoke explosions echoed on the hall as the older genin restarted her assault. Sasuke though, just stood there, making me frown. What are you planning now? My eyes then widened. Sasuke's hand joined together as he made a seal and then he vanished, leaving only little sparks behind him, where Tenten's kunai hit the ground. He reappeared to the girl's left, the lightning on his feet receding instantly. But it quickly came back as he made the hand seal again and dashed. So, that's what it looks like, huh? I thought to myself as I perked up, my eyes widening and a smile forming on my face. This time, Sasuke stopped right next to a very surprised Tenten, who could only let out a shocked exclamation before the Uchiha's cackling feet met the side of her stomach, sending her flying to the side. The boy quickly followed, running normally this time, and met her right as she tried to recover from the attack. Before she could regain her feet, Sasuke's fist collided with her jaw. And it's over, I settled once again. I expected better from someone older than Asino commented, not unkindly. I could understand though. It was a bit underwhelming to see a senior taken down by a simple jutsu. But it was a powerful one. And the fact that Sasuke only needed one hand seal to use it didn't help matters. Speaking of, since when does he know that one? I wondered interestedly. Glancing to the side, I noticed that Naruto didn't seem surprised, nor did Sakura, who was still standing further away, looking a bit downtrodden. It seems my friend's prepared some surprises. She probably is more of a support than anything else. She has 2 taijutsu specialists in her team, so she probably distracts their opponents while they close the distance. That's my theory, at least I mused out loud. Not far off the mark, I would say. Anko nodded. Doesn't help that guy isn't well suited to teach much besides taijutsu. Maybe it didn't affect the girl though, or maybe it did. I simply hummed as the match was called once Tenten tapped out. All the joy I felt at seeing my friend win was swept away once I saw Sasuke turn around. He was hunched over, his right hand already over his left shoulder and his expression a clear pained grimace. I stood straight up and made my way to the stairs to wait for him. Good fight, I told him, and he let out a grunt. Take deep breaths, I advised softly, and he did so, even though it sounded forced. Concentrate on my voice, okay? Deep, slow breaths, pull your hand back, stand straight and relax your shoulders, I told him slowly and kept my voice low. He did so, even closed his eyes for a moment as he let out a drawn-out breath. Better, he replied, but I could see that his expression was strained. Now you know why I told you not to use jutsu, I said with a wry smile. His expression turned apologetic. I know you told me, but... Don't worry, I interrupted with a raised hand. You would have lost if you hadn't used it. And I know how much it matters to you. I'm happy you at least ended it quickly. I hope this doesn't help the seal much though, I added in my mind, hiding my concerns. That's what you told me to do, he replied, and I patted his right side with a half smile. And I bet you are glad you listened, he gave a nod at that, and I chuckled. You did great, by the way. He only gave a small smile back as we moved back to our group. My eyes then went to read the screen that showed the name of the next pair, and oh, would you look at that? I thought, raising an eyebrow. The two, together. It was something. Don't know what, but definitely something. Kurotsuchi vs. Neji. Bets? Ino asked curiously once I was back where I stood before, between Shikamaru and Naruto. Sasuke had taken a place next to his blonde teammate. Kurotsuchi, I said, although there wasn't much certainty in my tone. I don't know much about her though. Oh. Anko entered the conversation with a raised eyebrow and a twitch to her lips that told me exactly what was passing through her mind. Troublesome woman that she was, she probably really wanted to jump at the chance to tease me. We crossed paths in the forest. I didn't see much of what she could do, but she seemed good with ninjutsu. And I've already said that he is a taijutsu specialist, obviously, since he is a hyuga. So, it depends on if he can close the distance before she can shoot something at him. Shikamaru finished for me and I nodded. Know anything about anyone else? He asked this time, and I felt everyone turn to me. Not really, I said, even though that was a lie. I knew what Tamurai and Kankuro could do, that was true. Same with Haku and Chaojura. Problem was, I hadn't seen them actually do anything as IG, which meant that I couldn't possibly know. The guy I told you about before. He can control sand, and I'm guessing that gourd on his back is full of it. Doesn't sound so bad, Ino mused, doubtful of my previous warning. It sounds really bad, Shikamaru disagreed instantly, frowning. How good was the control? I saw him break trees very easily when attacking, I explained. He moved it pretty fast too. How fast are we talking about? Begin. Let's watch and I'll tell you later, yeah. I told the Nara as my eyes snapped back to the small arena. Nobody replied, everyone had turned back to the fight too. Meanwhile, the fighters had already started moving. The Konohanin had immediately jumped forward, charging straight at his opponent the second he was free to do so. As for the princess, she either expected just that, knew Neji's specialty, or really didn't want to be up close with her opponent. Why? Because the first thing she did was jump backwards as far as she could. Kurosachi's hands were already running through hand seals too, and that made it so that when she set her feet back on the ground, she was already done. With her hands formed a circle around her mouth in a way that reminded me a lot of Sajuke's great fireball technique, she spat out a cloud of white dust. "What is that?" Ino asked, clearly confused. "An earth jutsu." "Might be," I replied non-committally. "That's a good question though," I mused. "What is that?" "I know it's probably her lava release, but that's not exactly lava." "Food for thought," I guess I mused to myself. It wasn't like I was the one that had to deal with it right then and there. And I, at least, knew what it was used for. Or one of its uses, at least. Neji himself might not have known anything about the technique, but he was smart enough to know that he had to dodge. And that's exactly what he did, jumping to the side and leaving. The jutsu proceeded to fall harmlessly on the ground where he had been before. My eyes fell on it for a moment, the corner of my mouth quirking up. "You know something?" Anko pointed out curiously as Kurosachi repositioned herself. The I1 had made sure to put the dust in between herself and Neji. She was already going through the motions to use the same technique again. "I do," I admitted easily as my smile grew. Kurosachi had used the jutsu again already. Neji's space to move was quickly reducing, I realized without a problem. It was easy to see from up on the balcony, but it was probably equally as easy for the Hyuga to know. Granted, he could have jumped over it, probably. But that would leave him open for an attack while he was up in the air. That was the problem with having no ranged attacks. A fatal flaw in the Hyuga's fighting style, since they had barely anything to attack from a distance. And this Neji also didn't have the rotation shield, whatever its name was. Or, at least, he didn't seem to know it. Not that it would have helped much. "This is finished already," I said. "Don't look so happy," Brat Anko chided, although there was no heat in her words. "You should cheer for your fellow Konoha-nin. Neji is a bastard though," I shot back instantly. "You sound like Naruto did with Sasuke," Ino pointed out, the mirth in her voice clear for everyone to see. "I mean, he is like Sasuke was." Actually, I shrugged. When I turned to my side, I was treated to what I swear was a pouting Uchiha. A rare sight, I assure you. The guy thinks too highly of himself, that much is clear. And he also has this belief in fate that is just all sorts of wrong. Ha! I think it's the first time I hear you complaining about someone. But, I complain about you all the time, Sensei, I replied with raised eyebrows, drawing snorts from both Asuma and Kakashi. "And Kiba," I added in my head. "Brat, I'm gonna." "Wow, look," I interrupted, turning to the match. "It's almost done." Neji's attempt to close the distance had continued, albeit ineffectively through our conversation. Now though, there was very little space for him to even stand on. And it was plain for everyone to see that he was very frustrated, if the scowl on his face was anything to go by. "Why won't you fight me?" the now very angry Hyuga shouted. Is he just annoyed because she hasn't really attacked yet, or is he annoyed that his destiny is being denied or some shit? I wondered to myself. It would have been interesting to know what the boy was thinking. From an outside perspective though, he looked like an entitled child, complaining because his opponent didn't want to fight on his terms. "But I am fighting you," Kurosachi shot back, standing from the other side of the room. It's not my fault that you never bothered to learn ranged attacks, she added with a shrug before her expression turned into a smirk. Or are you just bad at those? She asked, and I had to suppress a snort. She wasn't wrong about that. I had often wondered what the Hyuga clan's problem with mid-forward/long range attacks was. It didn't seem to be something that they outright refused to do though, since Hinata had had no problems with Shuriken Jutsu at least, and Hayashi hadn't mentioned anything about that. Maybe it was only with Jutsu. That didn't make much sense. The thought that it was because the clan was just bad at them was hilarious. Besides, why would I change my strategy when I've already won? The girl asked then, and Neji's eyes widened. What do you mean? The boy asked /demanded. I noticed that you didn't answer the first question. Is someone incompetent with ranged jutsu? Or maybe it's jutsu in general. She pointed out then, her grin widening. I wonder, I thought to myself, narrowing my eyes at the I1 in. Is she? Just then, two things happened. The first is that Neji opened his mind, evidently going to defend his pride from the insulting question. The second was that Kurotsuchi started going through hand seals once more. This time though, she was much faster than before. She intentionally did the others slower for this. I realized with my eyes widening slightly. Before the Hyuga could react to the incoming attack, the princess was already shooting a jet of water out of her mouth with her hands cupped in front of it. The stream didn't actually hit her opponent though, no. Instead, it hit the ground in front of the boy. Maybe you should improve your aim before mocking others? Neji asked, standing where he had been previously. Apparently, he had realized that the attack wouldn't hit and decided to stay. Bad idea, I thought to myself. Although, really, he probably couldn't have dodged fast enough anyway. So, Proctor Kurotsuchi turned to Gecko and raised an eyebrow. She also pulled up her hand, holding 3 shuriken in between her fingers. Will you call the match, or do I get to use the boy as a training dummy? What? Neji asked. What? Ino and Naruto exclaimed, equally confused and much more vocal. Look down, I said, louder than I needed to, so that the people down at the arena could hear me. The Hyuga turned to me with a scowl before doing as I said. He realized too late the trouble he was actually in. His eyes widened at the sight of his feet. They had been covered in a mix of water and the white dust, which I knew had solidified already. And if that substance could hold Gaara's sand for at least a second, then I knew the boy there couldn't hope to break free of it. Is that thing strong? Shikamaru asked. Neji won't be able to do anything unless she frees him herself. I'm sure of that. Just what happened in that forest? Anko muttered to herself, narrowing her eyes at me. You didn't actually ask for details, I replied with a shrug and an unrepentant smile. Fucking brat. What is this? Neji asked from below us, trying and failing to move his legs. Quicklime, Kurotsuchi answered easily, grinning from ear to ear. When hit with water, it'll dry quickly and harden. With that said, she trailed off and turned to Gecko once more, tilting her head questioningly. No, I won't be defeated like this. The Hyuga shouted. His opponent though, simply ignored him. The proctor looked between the two. He is still conscious and can still fight, the man answered neutrally. Although, it was plain for everyone to see what he thought of the match. It was obvious for everyone too, actually. The fight was done. Neji just wouldn't accept it, and so it continued. So, should I use Shuriken or Kunai? The I1 mused out loud for everyone to hear. Where's your destiny now, huh? Neji? I asked under my breath. Was it petty of me to be happy that the guy was taken down a peg? Maybe. It certainly didn't feel like the adult thing to do. But really, I had grown tired of his speeches about destiny and how he was destined to be superior and blah blah blah. And I had only had to deal with it a few times. Besides, sometimes it was difficult not to feel like a child. I snapped out of my thoughts as Kurotsuchi apparently decided what to do. It was neither a shuriken nor a kunai though. Instead, she spat a rock bullet at the still-trapped Hyuga. Wonder if that's the actual technique name rock bullet I'm used disinterestedly. It was difficult to feel much when the fight was so one-sided and on top of that boring. It reminded me of the Tenten vs Samurai fight in the anime that my notes mentioned. Neji countered so hard that it wasn't even a fight anymore. That attack was blocked though, the boy's hand destroying it mid-flight. Kurotsuchi didn't stop there though, she proceeded to spat even more stones his way. Ha, she doesn't use seals for that one, I noticed then. Although, the technique looked like it could be Earth Release's version of Embers, so that made sense. And so the barrage continued. Eventually, the boy was either overwhelmed, tired, or his hands just gave up little by little from breaking literal rocks. That's when he started to receive a hit here and there. Kurotsuchi, for her part, barely looked like she was tiring at all. When a stop hit the Konohanin's head particularly hard and knocked him out, the one-sided fight finally came to an end. Curiously, I turned to look at the boys' team. Tenten looked just sad that her teammate lost, I guessed. Rock Lee looked angry, although that was probably for how the battle had gone and how his teammate's opponent hadn't fought honorably or something. Guy seemed to get it though, shaking his head and looking disappointed. Really, there was no reason to be angry about this. It wasn't even like Kurotsuchi had wanted to mock him. She had only started to talk when he did, actually. If that had been Naruto or someone else, I would have smacked them for not just surrendering when it was obviously a lost battle. He hadn't even had a plan to support the fool's errand. There was not giving up and then there was being stupid. If one of you decides to do something like that, you better have a plan, I voiced to my friends. I won't sit here to see you get smacked around because you are stubborn. Everyone turned towards Naruto and the boy pouted indignantly. Why is everyone looking at me? The blonde asked. Better to just smack him later, Shikamaru decided, and I nodded with a sigh. Anko called out and I blinked before turning to her. She was looking straight at the screen and, when I followed her gaze, I paled. IG versus Gaara. Well, fuck. IG. You okay? Ino asked worriedly when I just stood there looking at the two names. Yeah, I'm fine, I replied slowly. I could feel the blood leaving my face. I had prepared, I had studied, and I had planned for a situation like this. But, actually being in it made me feel like I hadn't done nearly enough to feel safe. Kiddo? Anko asked with a raised eyebrow. If he is too dangerous, you can just give up. Nobody wants you dead and you can take this exam another time, she reassured, but I wasn't really listening. I had to fight this guy, after all. I had received lots of support while I prepared for this. All in the name of showing off the might of the leaf. And while I probably could give up without consequences, it would mean giving up on that support too. And that was something I couldn't do. I needed that to continue growing stronger for the future. I'm fine, I repeated, this time with more conviction in my voice, even if it was slightly forced. With a deep breath in, I looked down at my boots, to make sure they were tied well enough. Palmed the pockets of my cargo pants, to check that my kunai and shuriken were indeed placed in the specially made spaces. Then, my left hand went to my pouch, hanging from the left side of the belt I wore. It was filled all right. With a weak chuckle, I finished my self-inspection, adjusting the white bandages I had wrapped around my arms and hands, going all the way up to under my short-sleeved red shirt. My mind was only half paying attention to that though. Instead, I mentally pulled up screens in front of me, checking skills, perks and, most importantly, titles. Genin of Konoha and Shadow of the Shinobi might work here, worth checking at least, I considered. After all, I am here with the official mission of passing and the unofficial mission of showing off. It's worth trying that, at least. Everything was in place. I was as ready as I could be. "Wish me luck, guys," I said with a small grin as I nodded to my friends. "I'll probably need it," I added in my head. Kido Anko called again and I stopped MIT turn. "You can use the sword, if you need to. And also, you know what? But only if I need to." "I get it," I interrupted her quick addition, feeling like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. New Ivory would solve all my problems when it came to getting past Gaara's defense. "Wielder of New Ivory will come in great if I need to use it," I noted too. "And the cursed seal would be an ace up my sleeve in case I found that I needed to be more drastic in my assault." My grin regained some of its normal confidence then. "I got this," I thought to myself. As I walked down the stairs, I saw the Suna Jinchuriki already standing in the middle of the arena, arms crossed and eyes glaring straight at me. My grin widened at the prospect of fighting someone so strong while having all my cards playable. I feel like I'm turning into a bit of a battle maniac. "Are both of you ready?" Gecko asked, looking between the two of us. "I'm ready," Gaara replied curtly, looking ready to go. "I'm ready," I mimicked after turning off the weight seals on me. "Begin." "You didn't let me prove my existence," Gaara said, a scowl growing on his face. "And for that, I'll use your blood instead." "Well, that's not creepy at all, is it?" I asked, tilting my head with a grin. Inside, I felt my fear creep back around my heart. Not much though. I wasn't scared of him. I was scared of changes. I had seen many changes since I had appeared in this world, several of them completely unrelated to me and my actions, like the electives at the academy. What if he is stronger here? "Prove my existence," Gaara demanded, ignoring my question. "Yeah," I muttered as the cork came off his gourd and sand started coming out from it. "I don't think so, buddy." "Die" was his next word, and a light brown mass spread in the air before coming down on me. Running, free running, intermediate taijutsu, intermediate kenjutsu, I thought, before all but vanishing from where I had been standing. Running around, faster than he could react, I charged from his side. With a spinning kick, I hit the side of his head, my attack barely stopped by a handful of sand. I didn't stop there though, continuing my assault just like Lee had tried in canon. Sending kicks and punches from all around while the sand boy tried and failed to keep up with my movement. I knew it was probably a useless effort, but I wanted to try and see where I stood compared to Lee, compared to Gaara. Still, I kept my flicker readily in my metaphorical hand in case I needed to get out of a dangerous situation. So youthful. I heard someone shout from the balcony, although I didn't recognize who. Didn't really matter since it could have been one of two people only. When the sand started surrounding Gaara entirely too much for my liking, I jumped back a good deal to put some distance between us. With that, All the diminutive rocks fell to the ground, as if they hadn't been moving by themselves a second before. A grin threatened to split my face as I gazed upon the Jinchuriki. "You are smiling," he pointed out, a confused frown on his face. "Why?" "You are strong," I replied with a chuckle that turned into a laugh as I fully relaxed. "Really strong but not too strong," I added in my head. "I can take you, Gaara. You'll do just fine." "What are you talking about?" he asked this time, his annoyance growing as the sand started lifting, agitated just like its wielder. "You said something about me proving your existence," I answered, crouching and taking a deep breath in. "I don't know what that was all about, really," I continued, the words of the act coming to me with now familiar ease. You'll prove my strength." With that said, I turned off my energy skills and decided to try a different approach this time. Gaara's eyes widened at those words. The shock didn't help him at all with keeping up with my movement, especially since I moved even faster this time. The crackle of lightning followed me as I dashed to a side and charged back at him. My kick, this time, pushed right through his hastily drawn sand guard and hit him right on his jaw. He hadn't even had time to recover from it as a second kick hit his back. I could feel it, the layer of sand that covered his whole body, the last defense. My attack didn't pass through it, but he was bound to feel it at the very least. And I continued, just like that. And then a punch connected with his side. Then my foot met his thigh. And then a punch. And a kick. And a punch. Kick. Kick. Punch. Kick. Punch. Punch. Each hit felt like glory. I was overwhelming Gaara of all people. The poor bastard didn't even have time to react to any of my attacks. I was doing it. I was going to defeat him. No struggle, no tricks nor advantages like I had with the grinning man. This was all me. "Stop!" he snarled and the sand exploded, gathering around him in a small dome. "You are an annoyance," he growled as his face appeared from a crack on the half-sphere that protected him. I stood some distance away from him, still grinning and ready to go again, my hand twitching to pull out new ivory and pierce through his shield even if I knew I shouldn't use it. Not yet. Not unless I had to. "Come at me, Gaara." I probably looked like I had lost it to all my friends and my sensei. But this was my chance. My chance to see if all my effort, all my training, all that I had done since that day that I woke up in the academy, if my second life's time had amounted to anything. Gaara was, after all, a very strong opponent. And as such he was a very good bar to measure against. Orochimaru had wiped the floor with me in the forest. But he was one of the Sannin, it was somewhat expected for me to lose there. However, it didn't mean I hadn't felt that loss. This fight could mean so much. It would tell me, if I could really make a difference. If I could reach the heights that I needed to survive and to protect my friends. My progress wasn't slowing down. On the contrary, it was better than ever, what with the prodigy titles, never mind the apprentice one. My skills and stats had never slowed down. If I was already past Gaara's level at this point, I could be more than a mere side character with enough time. And that wasn't even considering the fact that I could even get some new perks and titles along the way. I could be powerful enough. "Kill me, Gaara," I mocked with a lazy "come here" gesture. "If you can." "Oh. Naruto's povey." He lost it muttered with a worried expression. No, Shikamaru denied, his lazy expression long gone as his sharp gaze locked onto the two genin at the arena. "He is doing just what he said. His fear both Ino and I felt our backs straighten at those words. He is checking if he can actually fight his fear. And he'll win, I added with a grin. He'll kick its ass so hard he won't ever be worried again. And that guy's too, while he is at it. That would be nice, yeah, the Nara nodded with a diminutive smile of his own. He's relaxed as of late, but he's still afraid. Ino finished, still looking worried about Ige's words just now. You worry too much, kids. The three of us jumped when we heard Ige's sensei speak right behind us. Everyone is afraid of something. Yeah, but he was. I struggled for a moment, not quite getting the words I wanted to describe how frightened my brother was. I know, she said, a semblance of an understanding smile on her face. But he's much better now. And this fight? The lazy bum isn't wrong. This fight is to prove it to himself, that he is strong enough for the dangers out there. Just like he said, she explained. Doesn't surprise me that he sees it like that. That other kid is something else. None of us would stand a chance. Shikamaru nodded. Ige is the only one that can, at least from our two teams. I think he corrected with his eyes moving towards Sajuk. I wanted to roll my eyes at that. Everyone knew that the Uchiha was touchy when it came to admitting weakness. You are not wrong. The words coming out of said bastard surprised everyone. The boy himself, though, was staring intently at Ige. But I'll get just as strong as him, eventually. I won't be left behind. Got that right? Chaoji commented, speaking for the first time himself. The five of us grinned, turning towards the fight just in time to see the defensive dome turning into a wave of sand going Ige's way. We should have been worried. By all means, such an attack would kill any of us. Ige though. That's it, come at me, you creepy bastard. He spends too much time with you, Naruto. Ino grumbled. I know, right? I asked back quite proudly. Oh. Ige's povey. I was, maybe, too pleased as I dodged Gaara's attack and noticed that his whole body was covered in cracks all over his skin shield. Why was I afraid of this battle again? I thought to myself with a grin. I knew why though. It was because I was afraid of any and all named characters that were in one way or another enemies. Gaara was right now. Yes, he turned into an ally later on, but that was after Naruto's talk no jutsu. So, for the moment, the Suna Jinchuriki was in the enemies list. And as such, he was a danger to me and those I cared about. I also knew that he was crazy strong, at least in terms of plot before the time skip. With that said, I was kicking his ass, like Naruto would say. Absolutely dominating the fight, just like Lee with the gates opened had, and I could go on like this for a good while compared to the Taijutsu specialist. I felt so very proud of myself at that point. Like all my work had been validated at that moment. I felt, at that moment, like I might stand a chance in the crazy world I had been thrown in. For once, I could forget the sword that had been hanging over my head ever since I woke up that fateful day. An angry growl turned my attention towards my opponent once more, who seemed to be very annoyed at his useless efforts to trap me with his sand. Well, this was fun. Another growl followed my statement. But it's time I actually try and finish this up. You can't get past my armor, Gaara muttered. You can't win. Just because I haven't done so until now doesn't mean I can't, I countered with a grin. Cracking my neck as I prepared to jump into it again. I had been ready to pull out New Ivory at this point and get it over with. But his defense was crumbling without even needing it. So, it could remain a hidden trump card. He could form that perfect defense shell that he had and also leave sand to attack me, after all. That meant that I would get an opening if he wanted to try and kill me, which he obviously did. I really need more offensive jutsu, I thought with a grimace. I could win this, but it was only by wearing down Gaara's defense, not by breaking it or piercing it. My attacks must have felt like I was hitting him with a pillow in between. Still hits, but barely doing anything. I know what I'll be creating next time, decided mentally while sighing. Pushing those thoughts aside, I charged, lightning sparkling under my feet. It sucks that sand isn't a better electrical conduit, I complained, not even for the first time since I had researched that for this particular battle. With it, the guy basically countered all my strongest techniques. And fire wouldn't do much either. IG. I heard someone call but didn't turn. It was Anko. I didn't need to take my eyes off the crazy murder-happy Jinchuriki to check on that. I wasn't that stupid. Stop playing around and skewer that boy already. I blinked at that. To use new ivory. I thought that was to be kept a secret. With a frown, I dashed to the side with a simple, short use of running and free running and avoiding the sand attack that an impatient Gaara tried to send my way. I had stopped right beneath the balcony where everyone was. I thought I wasn't supposed to do that, Sensei, I voiced, raising my voice just enough for them to hear me. Change of plans, she replied. She sounded annoyed and scared too. What? Is something going on? Did someone order for me to use new ivory here? There's no kid here watching, is there? Why not reveal it on the actual third test? Why would they? My mind stopped working and my eyes widened as I focused on my opponent. Or, more appropriately, his eyes. His right eye's sclera had turned black and his iris yellow. This is bad, really bad, I thought while gulping. In a split second, I pulled out a scroll from the pouch on my hips and immediately opened it. You are going to prove my existence, I grimaced at the Sunanin's words, the sound coming out of his mouth almost distorting midway towards an animalistic growl at the end. A puff of smoke came out of the scroll in my hand and a second later I was already with the needle sword in my right hand and the thread that was connected to it passed behind me towards my left hand. Yeah, I voiced, my voice shaking the smallest bit. Mentally, I switched Genin of Konoha title for wielder of new ivory. I don't know what you are doing, buddy. Once I finished saying that, I disappeared, using a normal flicker to move behind him. But I don't like it. Intermediate Taijutsu, intermediate Kenjutsu, I activated, instantly snapping my arm forward and throwing the legendary sword. The weapon flew and passed right through Gaara's shoulder before he could even react. The boy looked down at the wound, now bleeding and with a metallic cord threaded through it. The Jinchuriki then raised his other, shaking hand towards his shoulder and I could hear him whimpering. Blood, the boy muttered, and I stared dispassionately. My blood. Nighty-night, son boy, I called out as electricity traveled between me and him through New Ivory's wire. Stunning thread was still useful even here. And they taught me this shit at the academy, I thought, slightly amused. A normal one wouldn't work here. I needed more power. Cursed seal, first stage I activated, and immediately I felt everything burn. It was like my shoulder had a white-hot spear buried right through it. But I also felt the cursed chakra flow through me. It was powerful, yes, but it also made my skin crawl. I ignored all that though, instead focusing on pouring every last bit of energy I had into the lightning technique. My efforts proved fruitful soon enough when the auburn-haired boy tensed and screamed as the shock continued going through him. I kept at it, since I knew the Baijua in him surely increased his resistance even if he himself probably wasn't used to either pain or electricity. I needed him to be unconscious before he unleashed Shukaku right there and then. Good thing I coated New Ivory and my other weapons in poison, and good thing I didn't use anything deadly. I patted myself on the back for good planning. I could only imagine the kind of fallout Konoha would be hit with if I killed the Kazekage son, not to mention their Jinchuriki. Eventually, Gaara's body fell limp, the illusion of him still standing kept by the thread on his shoulder. Immediately, I deactivated all my skills, first of all the mark. My hands remained trembling, but I could soldier through the lingering pain. With a quick pull, New Ivory disembedded itself from the wall on the other side, the thread went slack and so did the Sunanin, falling to the ground like a puppet with its string cut. In silence, I picked up my sword and started pulling on the wire. It feels anticlimactic for the fight to end like that, or maybe it's having to do this afterwards. Stories rarely show how everyone picks up their weapons at the end of a fight, I thought wryly. I had absolutely zero problems with that though. I would take an easy win every day if I could. I certainly didn't want to deal with Shukaku of all things, least of all without having the time to train the cursed seal or even anything at all that could actually stand a chance against such a literal force of nature. Winner, Ig Satageko called out, sounding somewhat surprised, although it could have been for several reasons. I imagined there were more than one reason to be after what had gone on. Maybe he was surprised by my level. That was a bit arrogant of me to think, but it was a possibility still. There was also the Jinchuriki that almost lost control to his Baijua, that certainly would shake anyone, and Gecko was only a Takubetsu Jounin himself. Hell, maybe he didn't know that I had a legendary sword in my possession. I wasn't really aware of just who knew about it. Not that it mattered, everyone would know now. Speaking of, "You shouldn't have that sword," were the first words I received from Haku's and Chaojura's unknown teammate. The previously mentioned two stood a little further back, looking rather indifferent about the whole thing, even if their comrade was very obviously angry. I took a good look at unfamiliar Genin, if that was even what he was, just to make sure I didn't actually remember him from my notes on the series. He had short spiky black hair and the lower half of his face was covered with a white scarf. He also wore a black, form-fitting t-shirt and black pants with grey sandals. The boy also had a great sword on his back that... Oh God, Zabuza had a kid? I asked out loud, disturbed. Fuck no, another voice spoke from behind the trio, and I turned to see Zabuza Momokai in all his murderous glory. The guy still gave me the chills even if I knew we were sort of allies and he couldn't do much right there in the tower. The brat is a fanboy. Zabuza-sama. The fanboy himself whined pitifully, clearly upset that his attempt at intimidation was foiled. Doesn't matter, he recovered quickly, at least. He turned to me, his expression dead serious. I'm Saito and I'll take that sword from you. That's nice, I nodded, walking past him. What? I heard Saito ask confusedly. You can try, that's for sure, Zabuza snorted next to me as I passed by him too. You should leave the sword out, kid. I stopped as I heard the other legendary sword wielder speak. You don't have to follow our traditions, of course. But it would certainly help with people like Fanboy over there. I kept it hidden because it was supposed to be a secret. I guess I can follow that tradition from now on, I shrugged. Ha, the man barked a laugh. Easygoing, are you? I'm just riding the high of that battle. It was something. It was something, all right, Zabuza nodded, his head turning to look at the medics taking away the still unconscious Gaara. Also, I hope you know how to use that sword for more than just throwing it like an oversized senbon. I'm no expert, but yes, I've been training with it a lot. You better. The mist will try to take it from you, kid, he informed me, and I could almost hear the amused grin on his bandage-covered face. Eventually, they will. Not everybody is as accepting of a foreign ninja having one of our national treasures, even with the swordsman tradition and the pseudo-alliance. You should be ready when it happens. They should be coming for it now, I shot back with a grin. They'll never take it from me if they wait too long. The ex-missing nin only laughed at that, and I heard the boy, Saito, go to shout something, but Chaojura put a hand over his mouth. We are coming for it now, the blue-haired boy said instead. It was a weird scene though, since he didn't have any of the steel one would expect in such a statement. Instead, he was looking away from me and slouching forward, as if embarrassed by his own words. Then you better pass these preliminaries, I said as I continued my way towards my group. I had just beaten fucking Gaara. As if I would be worried about these guys. And if Zabuza was acting as their teacher, then they couldn't have a legendary sword since none of them had it out in the open like Momokai himself. And that was the only way I could think of for them to actually worry me at all. And even that couldn't bring me down from the high I was riding after what had just happened. Couldn't wait, Naruto? I asked with a smirk as my brother in all but blood walked up to me. That was a great fight, IG, he said, pulling me on a tight hug. But I'm next now, cheer for me, will you? Sure thing, I replied with a smile, a little bummed that I couldn't talk to him more after my fight. My eyes then moved to see who his opponent would be, and then I paused. I hadn't even realized that was a possibility. I amused at the two names. This should be an interesting fight. Good luck, Naruto, I said, patting his arm, and my eyes darted to look again, as if expecting the names to change. Naruto vs Haku. Have I ever told you that you are a monster, kiddo? Anko asked with a raised eyebrow. Besides every day. I shot back with a grin. A flash of the grinning man's face appeared in my mind though. She's not talking about that, I told myself. But that was close, be more aware, brat, she chided, but I had thought about something to do if she mentioned that. What even was that? I asked, since IG clearly didn't know Gaara was a Jinchuriki. Did he have another bloodline limit besides the sand thing? No, she shook her head. Anko Keika, she said with a neutral tone, but I heard it for what it was. A warning to shut up. Can't tell you more, kiddo, my sensei said, faking a dismayed gesture and voice with the back of her hand against her forehead. At least, not in front of the rest of the brats, said. Brats frowned at her before looking at me. I simply shrugged helplessly but shot a look at Shikamaru. The boy gave me a slow blink before turning and nudging Ino, who was glaring at us. Does it really matter? The Nara said uncaringly. Sounds more troublesome than anything else. Besides, we won't have to deal with that one anymore. His blonde teammate rolled her eyes at his words before turning with a huff. She probably realized that if the senseis didn't want to tell them something, they wouldn't. So my teacher continued, tilting her head to the side. Did you prove your strength? She asked, with a wicked grin and a teasing tone. I simply smiled at her. I think so, I nodded, not bothered by her joking at all. At least, I've proved to myself that my dream isn't just a dream. I've proved to myself that I can reach those heights. Dream. She blinked and I blinked back. Why is this the first time I'm hearing of these? I hadn't told you. It was my turn to tilt my head. No, you didn't, brat, she replied with annoyance clear in her voice. Well, then, you should know, Anko Mitarashi, I spoke with a grin forming on my face. You'll be known as the Takubetsu Jounin sensei of the god of Shinobi. Whoa, you don't go for low goals, huh? She shot back almost instantly, even if there was honest awe in her face. But did you have to add the Takubetsu part? It would have worked just as well and sounded much more awesome if you hadn't, she grimaced. But that's what you are, isn't it? I asked innocently. Definitely your student, Asuma commented from the side with a grin. And definitely Naruto's brother, Kakashi added, leaning against the wall and with his infamous book in hand. Speaking of, I turned my attention from the Jounin group towards the arena, where Naruto was already face to face with Haku. Thoughts? You don't have an opinion now? Shika asked. Well, obviously my friends have been holding out on me, I replied, glaring at them, especially at a certain Uchiha who looked everywhere but at me. So I really don't know. Well, we don't know anything about her, so there's that. Ino shrugged with a grin that said she clearly wasn't worried about my annoyance. I knew what Haku could do, although, being fair, my knowledge could be at least a bit wrong since I didn't know how he could have progressed in the time since the wave mission where he didn't even appear. He's a boy, I said instead. All the genin sputtered at that, even Sasuke. And I wouldn't look so happy, Ino. I'll have you know that Naruto is my brother and that we know where you live. The girl quickly paled at those words. Wait, what do you mean? That's a Bochauge's words were interrupted by the proctor announcement. Begin. Our eyes turned instantly to the fight and everyone went quiet. In a second, the two participants acted simultaneously. Haku, for his part, instantly ran through a few hand seals. From there, a cold wind flowed through the massive room and the ice mirrors rose from the ground as if emerging through the ground. In a moment, Naruto was already trapped inside the dome of mirrors. Another bloodline limit, huh? Shika mused, sounding unconcerned. Which was fair, since Naruto hadn't been idle either. Oh no, I'm surrounded! Naruto exclaimed in an overly dramatic way that had our whole group rolling our eyes. Seal Arts, unmovable pyramid, he announced then, grinning from ear to ear. He moved fast enough that even I had some trouble following, probably due to how much practice he had put into this particular move since he wasn't normally that fast. 3 seal tags were placed against the ground, 1 in front of him and 2 behind him on each side. Then he snapped one up and an orange barrier formed connecting each tag, tall enough to let him stand up, although it wasn't as wide. That looks like the barrier the Sound 4 used during the crush, I noticed with raised eyebrows and wide eyes. Was that Fuinjutsu? I thought that was just regular jutsu, or is this just a coincidence? Might be, I considered with a slight frown, my eyes taking in everything that was going on. That idiot Sasuke scoffed. I decided not to comment on how the corners of his mouth quirked up. So, what's your plan now, Naruto? I asked myself in a whisper. I also wondered if the others knew what his tricks were now, since everyone appeared to have decided to hide their progress from me for some reason. Now, I have all the time in the world to finish my ultimate move. Naruto announced as he unsealed a scroll as big as his arm and unrolled it at his feet. Just you wait. And then the blonde proceeded to write on the paper with a wide grin plastered on his face. Not for the first time, I doubted my decision of not pursuing the seal arts on top of what I already did. I still stood by it though, since I knew that I couldn't have progressed so much in everything else if I had added such a difficult branch to the mix. Didn't mean I couldn't do it later, if I ever found myself with some free time. Naruto would always be happy to have something he could teach me, I was sure. I still tried to decipher the mad child's plan, even if I knew it was probably beyond me. The question actually is, what couldn't he do with such a large scroll? I mused wryly. Then, my eyes moved to Haku, who was standing inside the mirror. How that worked, I wasn't quite sure, but I wasn't one to question the logic of an anime world of all things. I knew better by that point. I didn't turn to him for that though. No, I wanted to see what he would do now. Would he think Naruto was bluffing? It was a possibility that I acknowledged. Would he try to break the barrier? That was probably what I would go for. Even if it was a bluff, it would still buy the blonde time. And I was sure that those mirrors must have been eating through Haku's chakra. No way that was easy to maintain, even if he had bigger than normal chakra reserves. Evidently, the Kirinin realized that too, because after a moment where Naruto continued scribbling away in his scroll, a volley of senbon shot at him from one mirror. Then, in a flash of movement that was almost too fast for me, Haku moved to another and did the same, and then again. In a second, needles were raining down on Naruto. All of them were useless though, bouncing harmlessly against the barrier. That part wasn't a bluff, apparently. Knowing Naruto though, there were at least 10 different ways he could have tricked Haku and the audience with just that barrier alone. Kid would have made a hell of a magician in my world, that's for sure. If he wanted to prank you, there was no way in hell you would see it coming. It added a sense of expectation to the fight, at least for me. To see what he would do. Haku didn't just sit there after his first plan failed though. The next attempt came in the shape of ice spikes. They looked to be as long as my arm and just as wide on the thickest part. Dangerous, no doubt, especially with how fast they flew. That's not the kind of speed one expected from such an attack, or at least not me. With a bit of thought though, it made perfect sense. In a world of ninja, no matter how strong the attack was, the best attribute of any technique was speed. It was better to hit someone with a weak attack than to not hit them with a strong one, obviously. It was for naught though, the icicles broke into pieces and the barrier remained strong. What will you do now, huh? I wondered with a slight smile as I watched Haku's reflection in a mirror. I had several plans to deal with such a barrier, since it was basically the same thing used against the Hokage. I had prepared a plan or two in case that happened again. If the crush happened anyway, it certainly wouldn't go down the same way. With such plans in my head, I waited to see if Haku would reach the most obvious and probably the easiest solution. Sure enough, almost a minute later, Haku performed my first plan for the barrier exactly as I had thought it. With his impressive speed, he dashed around the barrier and placed several tags surrounding it. From the balcony, we heard the ice user say something, although we couldn't quite catch what it was. I had a very good idea though. A second later, when the blonde didn't even acknowledge whatever the Mist Nin had said, the whole area around Naruto blew up. Team 10 tensed up beside me, just like I did. Sasuke, I noticed, didn't even twitch, still holding a slight smirk on his face. What did you learn when I wasn't looking, Naruto? I thought worriedly as the smoke cleared. Once we could see again, we were treated with the sight of the barrier, still standing. It seemed to be just as it had been before. The only difference was that it was lower than it had been before, resting now on a small crater made by the explosion. Naruto, for his part, continued writing as if nothing had happened. Even the floor where he had been kneeling looked to be perfectly fine. That's one plan busted, I thought with a grimace. No putting explosives underneath the sound for, it seems I noted mentally. Should be about done, Sasuke commented from my side, and all of Team 10 turned together with me. So, you do know what's going on, huh? I whispered as I locked my eyes on the arena. I didn't want to miss anything. How would my little brother handle this? Our Aunt Naruto exclaimed, his grin growing even wider, something that I didn't even think was possible at that point. Done. He finished with a dramatic swish of his hand. You have lost. I blinked at those words. Naruto was pointing forward, but Haku wasn't there. The Mist Nin was on a mirror to the side and higher, since they were out of the crater. That idiot, I heard Sasuke grumble to himself next to me, and I narrowed my eyes. I really didn't want to miss whatever the blonde was trying to do. I missed it anyway, apparently. The whole circle of mirrors blew up, suddenly and unexpectedly. Shards of ice flew away, hitting the walls of the arena. Then we heard the sound of cloth being dragged through the floor. That must be Haku, I guessed with narrowed eyes, trying to distinguish something from inside the cloud. Seal arts, unmovable pyramid. We heard then, and silence followed as everyone waited to actually see something. Eventually, the arena cleared of all the flying dust and smoke, leaving only 2 people in it and 2 sets of orange barriers. One set, the first one to appear in the battle, was now empty besides the piece of floor that it had kept intact after Haku's explosions. The second held the Mist Nin himself, a little banged up but otherwise okay. In front of him stood my brother, in all his over-the-top glory, making a victory pose with his right hand doing the peace sign. And that's a win for the future Hokage. The blonde announced, and a grin grew on my face as I took in the whole picture. Haku, himself, ignored his opponent in favor of giving the barrier a few tentative strikes with his fist and with kunai. It was useless, he and everyone else realized. Looking down, the seals were, this time, placed on the outside. He had no way of breaking out if he couldn't overpower it. And overpowering it probably meant using a shit ton of chakra or something of the sort. It was, indeed, a win for Naruto, I realized, pleasantly surprised. After all, there was no way that Haku had bigger chakra reserves than the blonde. Not that many knew that besides the Konoha people, for sure, but I knew. He really won just like that, I commented with a grin. Stupid unbreakable barriers, Sasuke grumbled, and my grin widened a little bit as I realized that the Uchiha had probably been the test subject of both, the barriers and the trap. No doubt he had been very annoyed if Naruto had gotten him inside one of those formations and left him there to prove that he was just as strong as him or something of the sort. He could have also used that for a prank too, it was a distinct possibility. You should surrender now, Naruto said, and even though he wasn't screaming, his voice was loud enough to be heard everywhere. That little fact made me smile a bit. He may be very different from how my notes said and even from what I had seen at the very beginning, but he was just the same in many aspects too. You can't attack me from the outside just as I can't attack from the inside, Haku replied, and his voice was much more difficult to pick up. It was lucky that the guy had ended up somewhat closer to our side, or we wouldn't have been able to listen at all. Naruto chuckled before shaking his head. Then I'll set up explosives tags all around and a different seal to deactivate the barrier just before it goes boom. So, that's surrender. He explained while crouching down to look at his opponent, who went quiet. I surrender, Haku finally acknowledged with a stiff nod. Winner, Naruto Uzumaki Gecko announced, and I felt the smallest bit annoyed that the guy spoke with such a dead tone. The more I heard it, the worse it felt. This was important for my friends, couldn't he put a little more emotion into it? And if his illness affected him so much, they should have put someone else in that position, for God's sake. After taking out both barriers, Naruto all but skipped his way towards the balcony's stairs. Meanwhile, someone appeared from the side and started repairing the arena with a few jutsu here and there. It would have made for some interesting fights if those craters had remained there, but, apparently, that wasn't the case. Next to me, Shikamaru clicked his tongue. He had probably already been planning to use those for his shadows, maybe. Just like he had done in canon, in his fight against Tamrai. Did you see, guys? Did you? Naruto exclaimed as he approached us from the side, and I stood straight as I grinned at him. We saw that, yeah. It was awesome, I praised with a chuckle. I'm feeling very left out though. There I was, telling you guys what I learned and you were all keeping things a secret. I feel like getting revenge, you know. Naruto's expression did a transition throughout my little speech. It began excited, with a wide smile. And then it slowly broke as his features started twitching. Then, at the very end, he paled and his now forced smile died a quick death. Well, let's not be hasty, okay, bro? Naruto tried, I would give him that. I'm thinking about a month without any ramen. The blonde looked like I had told him we wouldn't eat at all during that time. Or meat. I heard a choked sound from behind me. Yeah, full salads and soups for a whole month sounds about right. I had some recipes that I wanted to try too. You guys will love them. Even the more stoic Sasuke and Shikamaru were sweating bullets. With that said, congratulations on your win, Naruto. That was great. I pulled the still white as a sheet blonde in a one-armed hug and dragged him towards the railing. I really liked whatever that illusion thing was. I'm guessing it was another seal. Why yeah. IG, about those secrets, I swear. But most of all the barrier, that was just awesome. I wonder how much damage those can take. I continued, grinning from ear to ear. And it's always good to see that you can use your head when you want to. Might want to use it to avoid messing with the wrong people and all that, you know. Yeah. He nodded stiffly, his blue eyes looking at our friends for some support. Support that he didn't get. Definitely your student, Anko. Right. My teacher exclaimed, clearly proud. In all honesty though, good job, Naruto, I told the blonde, squeezing his shoulder and giving him a grin as he relaxed. I'm very proud of you. Those words had a very interesting effect on him. His grin turned into a small bashful smile that I had never seen on him and his cheeks turned slightly red. It hit me then that I didn't remember telling him those exact words, and if I hadn't, chances were that nobody had. I suddenly felt bad for not doing so before. Thanks, IG, he replied sheepishly. And it's okay if you guys want to keep your secrets too, I reassured everyone. It's not like I tell you everything I learn either, which was true. I usually told them a summary version of my training. Like how I was working on original jutsu and a bit of what they did, but not every little detail of the jutsu themselves. Would have been nice to have at least some idea though, I added with a shrug. We wanted to make it a surprise, Naruto said, scratching the back of his head. You wanted to Sasuke threw the blonde under the bus mercilessly. You agreed. Naruto accused him then while I tried to suppress my laughter. So, can I look forward to more surprises from you guys? I asked, looking towards Team 10. Then, curiously, I gazed towards Haku and the rest of the Mist team. The boy was bowing towards Zabuza, which brought to my mind the tool issue and made me wonder how that had gone without their encounter with Team 7. With some luck, the changes had affected that too, hopefully for the better. Then, I spared a glance towards the names being announced for the next match. Nojiko vs Lee. If this win doesn't go to Lee, I'll be very surprised, I decided easily. After all, if the guy had faced anyone other than Gaara in the preliminaries, I was sure he would have passed. He just drew the short straw with that battle, the poor bastard. Well, about that, he. Ino replied nervously, and I rolled my eyes. I really am not angry about this, Ino. Relax. I was just kidding, I reassured. Well, excuse me for being afraid, she grumbled while Chaoji nodded next to her. IG is scary, the Akimichi mumbled. Oh. I'll have to inform your parents of that. I'm sure they'll be very glad to know the two, and even Shikamaru paled at that. I should have known you would become troublesome eventually, the Nara complained with a groan. And yes, we have a few tricks too, he answered my first question with a shrug. You might get to see them in our fights. Looking forward to it, I nodded, before focusing on the fight. Thoughts? Naruto asked, also looking curiously at the fight. Lee, I replied confidently. I've trained with the guy, he is as physically fit as me, if not more so. And he is probably better at taijutsu than I am. He doesn't use ninjutsu though. Because he can't, Anko contributed, and I nodded. I already knew that, but, again, acting and all that. Still, what you said is enough to get an idea, Shikamaru shrugged. I can't think of many that can keep up with you without your weights. Speaking of, I need to up them again, I reminded him as I tugged absently at my bandages. I had reactivated the seals after my fight, and while they were very noticeable after so much time increasing the weight, I could tell when they were getting too light to really make me progress. Can't go a week without adding more, can you? Anko asked, rolling her eyes, although I could see that she was holding back a smile. I mean, I have to work hard if I want to kick your ass for all the times you've messed with me. Who, me? She asked exaggeratedly while placing a hand over her heart. Why, IG, you wound me. I just deadpanned at her before turning to the arena when the fight started. Expectedly, Nojiko wasn't bad per se, but Lee was just on another level. If the poor girl had been against someone else, she would have stood a chance. Her earth jutsu looked good enough, and she didn't use many hand seals for them. The problem was that she couldn't hit Lee with them. Then she tried a different approach, using a jutsu to get herself under the ground when it looked like her opponent would rush her and just end the fight. Then she tried to use the move that Kakashi had used with Sasuke in the cannon bell test, where she would pull Lee under the ground. Unfortunately for her, that didn't work out quite like that. Instead, when she pulled her hands out of the ground and grabbed his ankles, he pulled her up. Once she was out, she was basically done for, being close quarters with Rock Lee of all people. The next fight was Yoroi against Chaojura. Being perfectly honest, I had forgotten Yoroi was with us until he moved from where he had been leaning against the wall behind us in the balcony. Although, to be fair, he seemed to be a side character in real life too, funnily enough. The mask and black shades didn't help him gain much presence, really. It might be the shades that give a passive boost to stealth or something, what with this guy and Shino having so little presence, I thought with a snort. That fight wasn't much of a show either. Yoroi's style of fighting basically required him to get up close and personal with his opponent. And while Chaojura didn't have a legendary sword yet, he did have a very imponent normal sword. One that was suspiciously similar in shape to Hiramekaya. They aren't being very discreet about training the guy to be a wielder, are they? That might be on purpose, I mused. Back to the point, that sword meant that every time Yoroi tried to get close, he would be met with a cold, hard edge. And maybe my teammate would have stood a chance even with that disadvantage. But then the fact that he was fighting with one of the seemingly prospective wielders for a legendary sword struck and his chances plummeted. Chaojura didn't leave any openings to be taken, and soon enough the battle ended with Yoroi giving up as his body was slowly being covered in more and more cuts. Shame that, huh? Naruto asked me and I shrugged. Bad matchup, I replied simply. Seems to be kind of a theme in these preliminaries. If I didn't know better I would have thought it was on purpose, I mused. Besides, I'm not really surprised. That sword looked a lot like one of the legendary swords of the mist, I informed them, and Naruto turned wide-eyed to look at Chaojura. I thought so too, Shikamaru nodded. And then the next battle was announced. Good luck, buddy, I said, patting him on the back. Before, I would have doubted Chaoji's chances against the elder Suna brother. Now though, with the surprises that my friends seemed to be pulling out of nowhere, I didn't know. It wasn't a bad thing when I wasn't fearing for their lives. Not that Kankuro was precisely a safe opponent to have, but I didn't think there was much chance of him killing someone fast enough that no Jounin would be able to stop him or help. Kick his ass, Chaoji. You can do it. Naruto and Ino shouted as the Akimichi made his way to the arena. I grinned as I saw his back straighten as he kept moving forward. Thoughts? I asked. Difficult to tell, Shika shrugged. We don't know anything about the other guy. Do you? Nope, I denied. Sometimes it worried me how easily lying had come to be for me, after years of doing it. How many times will you have that conversation? Naruto groaned. Chaoji'll kick his sorry ass and that'll be it for makeup dude, Anko and I chuckled at the makeup part, but otherwise, everyone shook their heads at the blonde. He isn't wrong though, I thought to myself. It was difficult to try and guess how a fight would go here. It wasn't like in my old world, where you could check if someone was bigger, had more muscle or things like that. Here, looks were deceiving. The smaller guy could be twice as strong as the big one. A fat dude could be faster than a thin one. There was really very little to take from looks alone. There was something that I could see though. Does the thing on the guy's back look like it has? I muttered, my eyes narrowing as I put up my act with practiced ease. Hair. It looks just like his too, I pointed out. That's true, Ino said, taking a better look herself. Weird too. Begin. Gecko called out. Immediately, Chaoji performed his human boulder technique, his body growing in size and then tucking himself into a ball before rolling at his opponent. I had been hit by that once and I had forever been grateful for the fact that I was easily fast enough to dodge. It packed a lot more strength than one would expect. Unfortunately, Kankuro was also fast enough to dodge. I was slightly surprised when Chaoji didn't continue rolling. Instead, he cancelled the jutsu right before he hit a wall and turned around. Just in time to see his opponent tilt his head at him with an amused expression. You are not fat enough, kid. The Sunanin shouted and I shook my head together with the rest of the group. Our Akimichi friend, meanwhile, scowled at the other boy. Chaoji wasn't as enraged as I had noted him to be at such insults, but he still hated to be called fat. It usually made him, at the very least, stop pulling his punches. If Kankuro wanted to use anger against my friend, he would have another thing coming. Again, Chaoji used the same technique. At least try something different, fatso. And try something different he did, actually. Our friend's attack had the same success it had previously had, but Chaoji had obviously seen that coming. He stopped mid-spin right after passing where Kankuro had been standing before dodging. His body returned to normal instantly, leaving it spinning in the air, and then he turned, still without touching the floor, sending another attack. This time, he expanded his arm only. A partial size increase that I didn't know he was capable of. If my notes were right, he couldn't do that until later, but it seemed that I had changed that too, unsurprisingly. His augmented punch got Kankuro right after he had regained his footing from his dodge, sending the Sunanin straight into a wall. How does it feel to get smacked around by a fatso? Chaoji said, using his human boulder once again and rushing the guy before he could even slide back to the floor. It's a pity though, that he is hitting a puppet, I mused, hiding a grimace. The real Kankuro was wrapped on that white cloth. And right before the Akimichi could flatten him and his puppet against the wall, he had the latter throw him away. Not bad at all, Kankuro called out, showing the trick for what it was as Chaoji deactivated his technique again. Turning to see just what he had hit with his jutsu, we all saw the puppet, now with its disguise crumbling to dust and leaving the wooden structure for everyone to see. I had forgotten how little it actually resembles a human body, I thought with a grimace. The thing had 4 arm-like appendages and 2 feet. Its face had 3 eyes in a triangle shape. Also, while not obvious, one could easily see that under the cloak that it wore, one could see that where the torso should be, there was something completely different. Taking advantage of Chaoji's surprise, Kankuro made a motion with his hand and the puppet started moving. It snapped 2 arms up and instantly shot a small barrage of kunai at the Akimichi. The Konoha could barely make it to avoid the attack, jumping back. Chaoji then stood there, eyeing his opponent and his weapon. Then, he seemed to come up with a plan, because he rushed towards Kankuro with a new human boulder attempt. I frowned as the Sunanin used his puppet to rain shuriken on Chaoji's rolling body. Those were all poisoned, weren't they? I recalled worriedly. They all bounced off of him, but there was a chance that they might have made small injuries. Nothing to worry about if they had been normal weapons, but poison changed things entirely. Regardless of that, Kankuro had to dodge eventually, jumping aside. The Akimichi, for his part, used the same strategy as before, stopping the technique midway to use another. This time though, there was no size increase involved. Instead, Chaoji went through a few hand seals and cupped his hands around his mouth. With slightly wider eyes, I looked as my friend spat out a ball of fire. Then, my eyes narrowed, as I inspected the technique. Fireball Jutsu. It's too small to be a great one, but it could be an overpowered embers too. I analyzed curiously. The flames weren't going towards Kankuro though, they were aimed at his puppet. Fuck. The older genin snapped his arm to the side, sending his puppet flying in an attempt to avoid the attack. It succeeded, partly, at least. The flaming technique hit it, but it only seemed to burn one of its arms and part of the cloak, revealing the scythe-like blades that located on its torso. Fuck, the Sunanin repeated, detaching 2 of the remaining arms and sending them flying towards Chaoji. The wooden hands then pulled back and a pair of blades appeared from their wrists, making them into pseudo-spears. The Akimichi, for his part, jumped to the side at the last second, making them hit the ground instead, and instantly retaliated with a human boulder. This time, Kankuro changed his dodging strategy again, jumping back but still staying right where Chaoji was heading towards. Makes sense, I thought with a grimace. Chaoji hasn't continued in the same direction since the first attack. My friend though, seemed to be anything but predictable, since he didn't stop the attack at all. With another loud curse, Kankuro jumped away, not quite escaping the attack, much like his puppet had in the fireball from before. Chaoji got him in the arm right before he could completely get out of his way. It was, coincidentally, the same arm he had been using to control the puppet, which crumbled down to the floor. Chaoji stopped rolling once he hit the wall. There was something different this time. The way he deflated back to his normal size was slower this time. The boy then turned around and I grew concerned. His motions were sluggish, I noticed once he took a few steps towards a recovering Kankuro. He looked pale and his breath was laboured. That didn't stop him though. With a deep breath in, he used his human boulder once again. Kankuro, for his part, was barely getting to stand up at that point. One of his arms holding the other, the older boy could only throw himself to the side to dodge the incoming attack, pitifully falling face first against the stone floor. Chaoji was having none of that though, stopping his attack midway again. With his arm expanding this time, he smacked Kankuro against the floor. I leaned forward then, narrowing my eyes and trying to distinguish if the Sunanin was out. That, and to see if Chaoji was doing all right. There was definitely poison in those shurikens from before I realized. When the proctor didn't say anything, I grew even more worried. The Akimichi, for his part, stood there, looking weaker and weaker by the second. He stared at the downed boy, waiting to see if his fight was done or not. And that was his downfall. The puppet came flying from the side, smacking against Chaoji and sending him to the floor. In a quick movement, the thing pinned my friend to the ground with its remaining limbs. Then, its head snapped up and a long, thick needle appeared from its mouth before it pointed it at Chaoji's head. "Do you surrender, Fatso?" Kankuro's voice asked and I turned to see the boy standing up with not a small amount of difficulty. A sad smile spread over my face. Chaoji wouldn't surrender. Mainly because he had fallen unconscious. "Winner," Kankuro Gecko announced and I sagged a little where I stood. "It was a great fight," Naruto said. He had a frown on his face but he didn't loom truly upset, only sad. "It really was," I nodded. "So, that guy uses poison too, huh?" Ino observed with a frown of her own. "Hopefully, this will be done soon, to see how bad it is," Shikamaru mused, looking at his defeated friend. While many would have said that he looked just as bored as he usually did, I could see it. There was a slight tensing on his shoulders and expression. And I wasn't surprised to see that, considering that he was as close to Chaoji as I was with Naruto. "It is what it is," I said softly and in a low voice, so that only Naruto and Shika could hear me. "Better to lose here than out there, right?" I added, looking at the mirror. "Right," he nodded. "It still sucks." "It does," I admitted with a helpless shrug. A second later, the new match was announced. My eyes moved to the side, where Chaoji was being taken out in a stretcher. "Once we are done here, we'll visit Chaoji," I promised in my mind. Then, I focused on the arena. Akatsuchi vs Karue. "We don't know anything about any of them," Shikamaru mused before turning to me. "Do we?" "I don't," I shrugged, for once not having to lie. "I don't remember much about any of those two." Granted, I hadn't checked my notes about them before coming, since they were from Iwa and Kumo and thus I didn't expect them, but I was quite sure that my notes didn't say much about them either way. Then, the match began. Right from the beginning, it proved to be an interesting match-up, if only because it wasn't clear who the winner would be, much like Chaoji's match. Akatsuchi was an Earth Release user while Karue was a Lightning Release one. The I-1 seemed more oriented towards strength and endurance, with a solid Taijutsu stance. The Kumo-nin, for her part, was much faster and skilled. If the proficiency she showed with the long katana she took out of a seal was anything to go by. In my mind, I viewed this as a battle of strength vs dexterity. As such, while my friends expressed their doubts about who would win, I already had a favorite. I kept that information to myself though. Back to the match though, Akatsuchi started the match with an earth jutsu that seemed to still require him to do a few hand seals. He then proceeded to spit out a freaking earth golem from his mouth. I don't even know why I'm surprised anymore, I thought with a shake of my head. Meanwhile, Karue had taken out the previously mentioned katana and taken her stance. Akatsuchi's construct was halfway done when the Kumo-nin zapped towards him. Literally, since she used the lightning flicker too. Does everyone know that technique, for God's sake? I thought, slightly annoyed. I have half a mind to pull a Shisui and make it a signature move, just to rub it in everyone's faces. If that became a goal, at least I had gotten started already, since I was the one to use it the most so far. Sajuk had only used it 2 times, after all. I narrowed my eyes to analyze how Karue used the technique. Akatsuchi managed to pull out a kunai in time to block the attack. It made sense that he could react. He was a character that I remembered being important enough to be named. That alone spoke for his skills. Besides that, there was the logical assumption that someone from Kumo was more likely to use lightning techniques. Just like people would expect someone from Konoha to use fire techniques and so on. There was also the fact that, as stated, there were 2 previous participants that had used the flicker already. It would have been disappointing if he was surprised by the technique. With another flicker, Karue put some distance between herself and Akatsuchi. Unfortunately for her, the golem was already fully formed, which added more danger to her should she get close. He isn't stupid, I thought as I looked at the I-1 put his back against the golems, facing against Karue. He knew that speed was his weak point, and tried to counter it, leaving less openings for his opponent to take advantage of. Still, is he? I didn't even get to finish that thought before Karue dashed to the side. When she stopped, she turned around and did one single hand seal and extended both hands forward. Electricity sparked between her fingers for a split second before it exploded in Akatsuchi's direction. Electromagnetic strike. I think it looked weaker than electromagnetic murder, to me at least. Yeah, that was too obvious an opening, I thought, amused. Karue had shot at the golem. After all, if Akatsuchi was touching the thing, it would conduct the attack right at him, which was why Earth was weaker against lightning. I'm not sure electricity actually works like that, but, again, Naruto logic, I thought with a small grin. The I-1, though, proved once more that he was more intelligent than he looked, since he hadn't been actually touching the Earth construct and thus, was safe. There was a moment of pause between both contestants then. Probably because Karue was thinking of a way to get past Akatsuchi's defense and the latter was thinking of a way to hit the faster lightning user. The first to act was Karue, dashing to a side, stopping and then rushing in from the side. I narrowed my eyes. The technique was all right, I thought to myself as I thought about why her use of the flicker looked wrong. So, why did it feel like she was slow? The I-1 once more, blocked her attack, and this time the golem was right there with a follow-up counter. Its punch though, connected only with the ground as the girl flickered right back when her attack failed. He has good reflexes, I thought, giving Akatsuchi another look. He looked less ridiculous than what I remembered him being, the image clear in my mind because I had drawings of everyone I had remembered in my notebooks. He was fat, yeah, but he didn't look like a ball turned into a person, at least. Furthermore, he was proving to be a very capable ninja too. Karue then tried again, this time using one flicker to change positions, another to get close to Akatsuchi and a third and fourth inside her sword's range to confuse the I1 as for where her attack would come from. It was a sound strategy, but she can't keep up with her own speed, I realized. Every time she stopped the flicker, she had to use a split second to take in where she and where everything else was. Granted, everyone needed that time before they could anything, but she needed a little longer than it should be normal for someone that had apparently mastered the technique to the point where she didn't need hand seals. She's never used the technique like that, I thought then. It would make sense. If she had always used it just for the movement and now wanted to use it in actual battle, it wouldn't work out too well. That was evidenced by her performance at the moment. Still, her strategy worked, although I had to wonder if it would do so for another time. Then she put distance between them again. Akatsuchi, for his part, held on to his left arm, which had received the sword slash unprotected. My eyebrows rose as I saw that he looked just as calm as when the match started. Does he have a plan? If he did, it wasn't enacted at that moment, since he stood there, simply staring back at Karue. Waiting, was my guess. For what? I didn't know, but that's the impression I got, at least. In the end, the Kumonin rushed in once again with lightning at her feet. Once again, she used a few flickers in close quarters to distract before her sword slashed at her opponent. Akatsuchi could barely deflect the blade enough to reduce the damage, but he still got another cut on his left arm. His golem, though, finally got another chance to attack. Unfortunately, the earth structure was too slow to connect the hit. That didn't seem to be the plan though, because immediately after the girl got away, Akatsuchi put his right hand on the floor. A second later, the ground under Karue moved on its own, surrounding her feet and legs up to her hips. And, match, I said, with an impressed expression. Ha, I expected her to win. She was much faster than him. She was too confident, Shikamaru explained. She wasn't used to the flicker like you or Sajuka. She probably was trying to not look so bad after your performances though. That's what worked against her. If she had enforced the flicker thing, she probably would have had better chances. Winner, Akatsuchi Gecko announced once the I1's golem got close to Karue and she gave up. Pride, basically, I summarized with a shake of my head. Tilting my head as the last repairs were done on the arena, I looked at the new match participants. Omwa vs Shikamaru. What a drag, the Nara grumbled as his head dropped down on his arms over the railing. The rest of us shared a light chuckle at his antics before I patted him on the back. Come on, the sooner you are done with this match, the faster you can be a lazy bastard again, I encouraged cheerfully. Troublesome friends, troublesome exam, he muttered to himself as he stood up and cracked his neck before very slowly making his way to the stairs. I shook at him. Sometimes that guy's energy levels worry me, I said with a grin. You think he can win? Naruto asked and I snorted. If he isn't done in, like, 10 seconds, I'll be very surprised. That's not really an answer, Naruto replied cheekily. I had to give it to him though, he wasn't wrong. Either Shikamaru would destroy the guy with one tactic or another, or he could just give up. One never knew with the lazy bum. My eyes then moved towards his opponent. Once more, I regretted the fact that I didn't know much about this guy. Omwa was obviously a swordsman, considering the sword that hung on his back. But otherwise, I didn't have the slightest idea about how he fought. Best guess is that he'll be like Karue, Kenjutsu and Lightning Ninjutsu, I thought with a grimace. After all, I was assuming, and that was always a bad thing. Begin. Gecko called out once more. Everyone was surprised to see the lazy Naru snap into action in a split second, sending a handful of senbon towards his enemy. A grin grew on my face at that. I wasn't shocked, but I couldn't say I expected him to take it so seriously. I wonder, did you see something in him, or do you just want to get it over with? I wondered in my mind as I eyed Shika. Predictably, Omwa took out his sword and skillfully deflected all projectiles easily enough. However, I wasn't so sure that was all. A useless attack as the antithesis of Shikamaru. He had to have had several reasons for that alone. Narrowing my eyes, I saw it after a moment and let out a chuckle. IG. Well, this is done, get ready, I told her with a wide grin. Ha! Just then, the Kumonin seemed to start getting ready for an attack. Or tried to, more like. Midway through the motions, he froze and I could see his hands twitching, as if struggling against something. Then, his hands let go of his sword, which came down to the floor with a resounding metallic echo. His feet separated and his fingers interlocked into a hand seal. The shadow imitation hand seal. Looking down, I saw Omwa's shadow moved sideways instead of how it should have, which was backwards. It then seemingly cut at one point. However, what really happened was that it then followed through the shadow of a senbon's ninja wire that had embedded itself on the wall behind the Kumonin. Shikamaru had connected his shadow with his opponent's through the thin shadow cast by the thread. Kinda like in canon, but he did all that himself this time, I thought, slightly amused by the coincidence. No real surprises here, I guess, I added in my mind. I had known he could use senbon, since he had been one of the ones to take the extra work with me on the Shuriken Jutsu class. Ninja wire was something that everyone knew how to handle, even if not everyone used it as much as me. And he had only used his family technique too. I have to wonder if there's anything up his sleeve now, I thought, feeling a little competitive. Then my eyes narrowed as I looked at my friend's opponent, who was now walking backwards, probably so that Shika could make him knock himself out against the wall. This means that Kumo is out, I realized. I don't know if that's good or bad. What were the chances that the Land of Lightning would take offense for this or something of the sort? My knowledge of that land was spotty at best, even more than with all the others. I didn't remember much about the current rakeage, but what I didn't give me a reassuring picture at all. Especially since one of the few clear things in my head was how they had tried to kidnap Hinata. That was a great offense in my books by itself, but also had created no small amount of problems in the past and in the present. Here's hoping I'm just being paranoid, I thought to myself as I waited for Shikamaru to come up to the balcony after his win was announced. Now it was Ino's turn against the Kirinin that had all but challenged me for New Ivory. Good luck, Ino, I told her with a smile. I don't need luck, she huffed with a grin of her own. I'll be done faster than Shikamaru, just you wait. That's the spirit, I nodded. Then we can all go visit Chaoji. That's it, Sky, for now. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for watching.